In case we have never met, I'm Michael Price, and I want to help you succeed in growing your business.
I'm Nancy, your co-host, and today is July 14th.
Welcome. I'm Michael Price, your host.
Usually, when you want to lock down a physical facility, make it truly impenetrable, you go all in. You install biometric scanners, you hire armed guards, put up concrete barriers.
Right, you completely restrict all external access.
Exactly. And mathematically, your threat surface basically approaches zero. But the second you do that, the people working inside, well, they can't easily receive deliveries. They can't collaborate with outside vendors or adapt to sudden changes.
Yeah, you've protected your assets perfectly, but you've entirely lost your ability to function in the real world.
Which is exactly the tension happening right now at the Pentagon. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at a massive, completely unexpected shift in how the U.S. military handles cybersecurity with its defense contractors.
And this is based on a stack of research notes from the 14th of July, 2026, along with a newly published Federal News Network analysis.
Right, and the ultimate irony here for you, the listener, is that at a time when state-sponsored cyber threats are basically omnipresent, the Pentagon has deliberately hit the brakes on a major cybersecurity enforcement program.
The stakes here are just profound. We are looking at the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is usually just called CMMC.
CMMC, right?
Yeah, and our goal today is to help you understand this really profound tension between securing highly sensitive military data and, well, actually getting innovative technology into the hands of warfighters fast enough to matter.
So the catalyst for all of this is this breaking news from July 13th. The Department of Defense Chief Information Officer Kirsten Davies just issued a memo putting a complete halt on the rollout of CMMC Phase 2 requirement.
Which is huge because those were scheduled to start ramping up on the 10th of November 2026. It was right around the corner.
Exactly. So, to grasp the magnitude of Davies' memo, we really need to look at what these phases actually mean for the defense industrial base.
Right. And just for context, the DoD handles an unfathomable volume of sensitive but unclassified information. We're talking about API keys for logistics software, massive AI training datasets for autonomous vehicles.
Routing data for global troop movements.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, under Phase 1, which by the way remains in effect today, defense contractors basically self-assess their cyber compliance.
Okay.
So, they evaluate their own networks, they affirm they meet the federal criteria, and then they submit that attestation to the government.
Just on the honor system, essentially. But Phase 2 was supposed to completely alter that dynamic, right? Instead of relying on an internal assessment, Phase 2 mandated independent third-party cybersecurity audits for all contracts that involved that sensitive information.
Yeah, a certified outside organization would have to physically and digitally audit your infrastructure before you could even bid on a contract.
Which fundamentally changes the barrier to entry.
Completely. You're moving from a trust-based model to a strict verification model.
Okay.
The military was, no longer going to just take anyone's word for it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at the history in our sources, the whole genesis of this program almost a decade ago was driven by Inspector General audits showing contractors were just systematically failing at that self-attestation.
Right. The data explicitly showed the honor system was leading to incredibly poor security.
Companies were checking boxes on their security plans without actually deploying the controls. So if we know self-reporting failed in the past, why would the DoD suspend the strict third-party checks? Seems dangerously counterproductive.
Well, Davies actually addresses that exact paradox in her memo. The DoD recognizes this really hard truth, which is that administrative compliance just cannot come at the cost of warfighting capability.
Meaning the program was backfiring.
Practically backfiring, yeah. It was originally designed to filter out bad actors and vulnerable networks. But the mechanism of that filtration, the audits, became so cumbersome that it was actively strangling the industrial base itself.
It's like that physical facility analogy we started with. The security apparatus just became so heavy that the business couldn't operate.
Exactly.
And to understand how a security program backfires like that, we have to look at who it impacts most. Looking at the Small Business Administration data alongside the DoD feedback, this friction isn't really hitting the massive prime contractors, is it?
No, not at all. The massive primes have, dedicated compliance departments and basically endless capital. The damage here is entirely concentrated on the small to mid-sized innovators.
The smaller companies.
Right. And the SBA isolated four specific, really prohibitive burdens that are just crushing these smaller contractors.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is the compliance costs themselves. Just the sheer capital required to hire these external auditors and overhaul legacy networks to meet the exact letter of the framework, it's become an untenable barrier.
Because those costs can't always be recouped in the contract pricing, right? So the security overhead basically wipes out their entire profit margin.
Okay, exactly. And then the second burden is the severe shortage of C3PAOs.
The auditing organizations.
Right, the third-party assessment organizations. The government mandated that companies use them, but the pipeline to actually become an accredited C3PAO is incredibly rigorous.
Which creates a massive bottleneck. I mean, you have a situation where thousands of companies are legally required to get this audit to keep their revenue streams, but there simply aren't enough certified auditors to do the work.
Yeah, the wait lists stretch for months, sometimes over a year. And a small business cannot just sit in a holding pattern for a year waiting for a compliance stamp. They'll burn through the runway and collapse.
Wow. And while they're waiting, the rules keep changing, which I assume is the third burden.
Exactly, the complex shifting regulatory timelines. The goalposts just keep moving, making it nearly impossible for a firm to effectively map out an IT roadmap or allocate a budget.
And the fourth one?
The fourth is the bureaucratic red tape itself. Davies characterized the current program as basically a compliance checklist. It prioritizes generating correct paperwork, like massive system security plans, over actual functional security architecture.
Let me jump in and try to make this real for the listener. Just ground it in a real-world scenario. Let's say there's this brilliant small-town engineering shop or maybe a mid-sized SaaS company, and they just invented a breakthrough AI logistics routing tool.
Okay.
And it optimizes supply chains like 30% more efficiently than legacy systems. The military desperately needs this for Pacific theater operations, but this company is looking at two potential clients. Client A is Amazon.
Right.
Amazon requires a standard SOC 2 compliance audit, which the company already has, and they can sign a $10 million contract tomorrow.
Yep, happens all the time.
Right. But client B is the DoD. To get that same $10 million from the military under CMMC Phase 2, they have to spend $500,000 upfront re-architecting their environment, wait 14 months for a C3PAO auditor, and generate hundreds of pages of compliance documentation.
So what do?
They walk away.
Exactly. The real-world consequence is inevitable. The combination of these burdens isn't just an annoyance. It is actively forcing the most capable modern tech entrants to opt out of DoD contracts entirely.
They pivot to the commercial sector where the friction is lower and margins are higher.
Exactly. The Pentagon, by attempting to mandate this airtight environment through human auditing, is freezing out the exact critical suppliers it needs to maintain technological superiority.
So that leads to a really natural follow-up. If the current system is freezing out the innovators the military needs, what is the new philosophical approach to actually fixing it?
Well, that pivot is currently being driven by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He introduced this new acquisition transformation system, and the entire mandate of this initiative is just the aggressive elimination of bureaucracy to enable innovation.
Just optimizing for speed and agility.
Right, and getting non-traditional commercial tech into the military apparatus seamlessly.
You know, what really stands out in the federal reporting is how universally recognized this specific bottleneck is across completely different political administrations.
Yeah, that's a really crucial point.
Like, just imparting what the sources say neutrally, SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler, representing the Trump SBA, was highly vocal in praising the DoD's decision to suspend Phase 2.
Right.
She noted that the SBA worked extensively with what she called the Department of War and heard directly from mission-critical tech firms that CMMC was just pushing them out.
And she explicitly made the point that these small businesses are the backbone of national security, and they were being systematically pushed out of the industrial base.
But so what does this all mean then? I have to push back a little. Are we just throwing our hands up and accepting highly vulnerable networks as the cost of doing business just to get cheaper, faster parts?
That sounds like it, right?
Yeah, I mean, in an era of state-sponsored ransomware and IP theft, lowering the shield just to buy software faster seems like an enormous systemic risk.
Well, what's fascinating here is that Davies is explicitly stating the DoD is not abandoning security standards.
Okay.
She calls it a structural incompatibility. The shift isn't going from high security to low security. It's moving away from what she calls high-cost imposing red tape toward tangible supply chain and cybersecurity resilience.
Meaning actual cyber hygiene over third-party certifications.
Exactly. It's the difference between forcing a contractor to spend months drafting a 300-page policy manual about zero-trust networks versus simply deploying active endpoint detection software and moving on.
Right, functional hygiene that actually stops adversaries rather than just surviving the federal rulemaking process.
Exactly.
But changing course from a compliance checklist to tangible hygiene sounds great on paper, but given the massive history of this program, how will they actually pull it off? I mean, this thing has immense bureaucratic momentum.
It really does. And the historical context is just crucial to understanding the sheer scale of the untangling required here. It's a decade-long saga.
Yeah, walk us through that timeline a bit.
So as the Federal News Network mapped out, it began when those initial Inspector General audits showed the self-attestation failures.
Under the old NIST standard.
Right, so the first Trump administration under former acquisition official Katie Arrington built CMMC from the ground up to require these third-party checks.
They basically tried to synthesize an entire auditing industry out of thin air.
Yeah, and it created immediate friction. So then in 2021, the Biden administration paused it due to the exact same small business concerns we're talking about today.
Right, they were worried about costs.
Exactly. So that led to a stripped-down version called CMMC2. Then the DoD spent years grinding through the rulemaking process. The final rules were finally set for late 2025 and into 2026. And now, under a new administration, it's paused again.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Just think about the scale of this. The DoD estimated roughly 80,000 companies were slated to be subjected to these third-party audits.
80,000. It's staggering.
And the institutional knowledge to manage that is largely gone. Former key officials like Katie Arrington left and Stacey Bustianic recently retired in March 2026.
Right, which leaves Davies to untangle this massive web.
So what is the actual solution? They can't just hit pause on 80,000 companies and leave a vacuum.
Well, Davies launched a 60-day top-to-bottom review, and it's being led by a new CMMC reform task force.
Okay, a 60-day sprint. What are their specific goals?
They have three. First, prioritize speed to capability. Second, definitively lower barriers for small and non-traditional businesses. And third, replace those prohibitive models with scalable, realistic measures.
But during the 60-day suspension, what happens to the contracts? I mean, the military still needs to buy things today.
Right. So the DoD is completely halting all future CMMC milestones until further notice. They're going to rely on self-assessments again, and they'll conduct a select number of government-led audits directly, just bypassing the C3PAO ecosystem entirely for now.
Wow, bringing this back to you, the listener, whether you work in defense or you run a small business or you just care about national security, this story really highlights a universal modern struggle.
It really does.
It's this desperate need to balance rigorous security with the agility you need to innovate, overregulate, and you lose your competitive edge. Underregulate, and you leave your data vulnerable.
Yeah, and I want to leave the listener with a final thought to mull over regarding that exact balance.
Go for it.
We've established that relying on self-reporting is historically flawed. People check boxes, but bringing in human third-party auditors is clearly too slow and expensive. So could the future of defense compliance bypass human auditors entirely?
Wait, really? How would that even work?
Well, perhaps the scalable, realistic measure the task force is looking for lies in automated, continuous, AI-driven security monitoring.
Oh, wow. So instead of paper checklists, exactly. A system that verifies tangible cyber hygiene in real time, pulling data straight from the network architecture. No waitlists. There's no massive consulting fees. Just continuous automated verification.
A technological solution to a bureaucratic problem. I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources, everyone. Keep questioning that balance between security and innovation in your own fields, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
A special thank you to MarketUS.com for furnishing us this information. You can reach them at MarketUS.com or call them at 954-636-3232. Before we go, this deep dive was created by the MarketUS.com team. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It's right below the subscribe link.